Welcome to the Buzz Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Mosquito.
And I'm Maureen Nylin.
The Buzz Podcast is where business, technology, and innovation collide. It's where we deep dive into candid conversations with leaders who are pushing the boundaries in healthcare, technology, and beyond.
It's also where you're going to hear industry experts who are rewriting the rules, and in some cases, they're breaking them. So don't forget to join us for each new episode and like and subscribe to the Buzz Podcast.
I'm your host, Mike Mosquito, here with my wonderful co-host, Maureen Nylin. And today we have a special guest who brings a wealth of experience, all kinds of insights, and a discussion that you're going to love. Joining us today is Trish Gallagher, a former Chief Nursing and Informatics Officer who has made a significant impact in the industry. And again, I want to let you know, Trish is going to be talking today about her informatics experience as a nurse, but she's also going to be talking about why she transitioned out of the nursing industry. Welcome, Trish. Glad to have you today.
Great. Thank you, Mike. We're thrilled to be here.
Well, I am so excited, Trish, to have another conversation with you. I honestly did not sleep last night because I was that excited. And you were introduced to me because I read an article that you were featured in. And that article was phenomenal. It really did. It touched me because it was raw and it was real and it was authentic about your experience as a nursing executive. And I think sometimes the articles that we read, they're just so focused on the joys or the successes that the healthcare industry is having. And I think those are important. But at the same time, we don't often hear about the frustrations or the setbacks that people have in life. And so your voice in that article really just helped to nurture a lot of the same feelings that we've all had from time to time, regardless of whether or not you're in healthcare. And it opened a door for a conversation. So I am so thrilled that we're going to have this conversation with you. In the article, you had talked about really achieving your dream job as a CNIO. And over time, that dream job and the perception of what that dream job was, it changed. So I want to know more about your experience.
Sure. Well, thanks, Maureen. So I am obviously I'm a nurse. I have been in health IT for probably close to 30 years now. I actually started out as a builder, building software for one of the EHR vendors, and eventually kind of worked my way up. I will say I kept finding myself pulled towards the IT side of things. And as a nurse, really kind of kept trying to get back to the clinical side. That was when informatics kind of made its debut. And so did a lot of years as a director of informatics. I've actually set up informatics, brand new departments in multiple organizations over the years. I've done a lot of EHR implementations because, of course, that was the early focus. And then the CNIO role started to make its debut into the industry. And I knew right away that that was the role I wanted. I knew that that was a lot of the work I had already been doing. But what I really wanted to do was partner more with the CNOs on strategy. So as we did these implementations, it felt like we were putting in functionality, capabilities, but we weren't really looking at the strategy for nursing and what nursing needed to really use technology to its fullest. And so the CNIO role made its debut. I knew that was the role for me. And what I found was I really enjoyed the strategy work, but we are very much still, I'm going to say, an implementation focused industry. And what was happening was people were coming at IT nursing with all these solutions, right? Most of the time applications that they had found that they felt would solve the problem. But the nurses weren't always at the table. So other people had an opinion on what would solve nursing's problems. And so it just really started to become almost a firefighting drill. And there was no time to really look at what's the roadmap, what's the strategy, and get the resources to do that. So that's kind of my short story in how I got here.
Well, glad to have you here. Step back 1 second. Tell us what you're doing today, because we didn't give that at the beginning of the podcast here. Let's step back and give a little, what did you transition to when you left that wonderful role?
Yeah, and I've been a CNIO in a couple different organizations. So this is, and I want to be clear, like this is not anything related to one organization. This is
Right.
25 years of experience, right? It
Right,
just kind of
right.
honestly came to a head. So I have joined an organization called Chartis. Chartis is one of the leading strategy healthcare consulting organizations. So I really haven't stepped away from nursing because what I'm working with Chartis on is really nursing focused things. So we're looking at virtual nursing, right? Clinical communication systems. We're looking at data and metrics for nursing. And so our goal is to really be working closer with CNOs. And so I'm hoping that now I won't be fighting those daily fires and I can actually work with organizations on strategy, helping them accomplish the right things.
Well, thank you very much for that, Trish. So let's step back and elaborate a little bit on those challenges you talked about a second ago. Do you think that where you sit now and having gone through those challenges as a CNIO and that 25 years of experience, where does that put you today, having lived through the trauma of being a CNIO and having technology put upon you? Um, where does that put you today? And what frame of mind do you have when you're actually working now from the other side? Now you're the vendor thinking, implementing, introducing technology. How does that affect your approach?
You know, it's probably given me more empathy. I remember my first project, I was actually kind of saying to my peers on the project, we have to be sensitive. IT's got a lot of things thrown at them. They may not have the resources to work with us here, right? Like just assuming that every organization is kind of going through the same thing, because most are being hit with, too many demands and not enough resources on the
Mhm.
IS side. And so I think that empathy and knowing too what IS is going through as well as nursing. So
Mhm.
understanding what the leadership demands as well as the people who are actually on the ground doing the work, their demands.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So, Maureen, I think you had a question for you were going to speak. You were going to have a question for.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, going back to those challenges, I think any of us that have ever worked in healthcare, even for 5 minutes, know how frustrating the pressure is to try to achieve those desired outcomes. And just in my own experience, I feel like sometimes we solutionize before we even understand what the problem is. So I'm curious if you've encountered something similar where you're rushing to an implementation or rushing to put a solution in, but it hasn't necessarily made sense at the beginning and it didn't necessarily achieve what you hoped it would at the end.
Absolutely. And I have to say that might be one of the biggest contributing factors is when you're constantly being forced to work on things that you're not even sure why you're doing them, right? Like, where's that purpose in your work?
Mhm.
Um, because I think you're right. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. People would come with solutions for maybe problems their department was having, might have a negative impact on nursing, but nursing wasn't at the table to even defend
Right.
themselves, right? And so it kind of goes back to that strategy piece again. We're solving problems with what I call band-aids, right? What's the shiny thing in the corner that someone's selling me to solve this problem, but we're not looking at the unintended consequences. And the timing of this is probably perfect. I think AI is a great example of this. Like, I'm excited about AI, but just like CPOE, we do not know what the unintended consequences of this are going to
That's
be. And
right.
we need to be really
Mhm.
careful with new things. And so I think that's exactly right. Is people are coming at the, everything takes technology now, right? Like there is not an operational project in the hospital that doesn't have a technology component anymore. And
Mhm.
so we get pulled in late when someone's already solutioned it. To your point, they're bringing us the solution. I will say some of the work we've done at my organizations was really around when people had requests, we weren't asking them for what they wanted. We asked them for the problem and the data to substantiate the problem they were trying to solve. So we could make sure that IS was part of that solutioning. But that's a really tough sell because a lot of times you get pulled in and to your point, they've already said, this is what we want. And inside you're going, that's not going to fix the problem. People will
Right.
find workarounds for this, but you're forced to do it.
Yeah, I can imagine that caused a lot of frustration. Um, and I would assume that led to some burnout. How'd you cope with burnout with all of these changes and the lack of understanding of how that impacts one, yourself as a CNIO and the staff under you? How did you cope with that burnout? And that's one piece paramount for clinicians now. That's one of the things we talk about and we hear when we go to these conferences or we listen to these webcasts. We're talking about physician and clinician work burnout. Talk to me about how was that managed at your organizations?
When I stepped away, a really smart person said to me, first of all, she said there's no such thing as a dream job. But she said anyone's going to have burnout when they are subjective to having more demands than resources to achieve those, right? And I thought about that a lot. And that's exactly what happened. Over 20 some years, it felt like constantly you were fighting against the time crunch that everything had to be done and the number of people you were going to get to do it. And so, how did I cope with it? Probably not very well. I probably internalized a lot, which maybe if I had handled that differently, I might have, ended up different. But I've always thought too that one of my roles as a leader is to remove barriers for my people, right? That's your role, is to help them be successful and get things that are causing them delays out of their way. And when you feel like you're constantly letting them down, I think that really eats at you personally, which I think was one of the things that really tipped me over the edge. Was I felt like I couldn't be a good leader anymore because I couldn't help those people.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
I will say the people I worked with are probably what kept me going as long as I did. I've got some good friends. You have your venting sessions where you talk about
Right.
things, but that's not always the healthiest way to do it.
Especially when you're all tired. That's the thing. You're all
Yeah.
tired, and there's another technology coming your way that's going to make life better for you, right? And so
Yeah.
it is about how do you consume you consume that technology. You have to learn that technology, but there's a learning curve along with your day job as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so being at a hospital and have worked at other hospitals, it is really how do you gracefully introduce technology at a rapid pace, right? And that's they're fight that sentence is fighting itself because care still has to happen at an expected level of the patient for the best outcome, right? They expect you to be at 100%. They never want to come in there and pay for 100% of care and get 60% of care, no matter what technology you're putting in. But ultimately,
Right.
that's what happens because when your staff is tired because they've been working on this implementation, something happens along the way where they're not able to consume new technology and their day job and sit around and do these focus groups for technologies that may be coming in. Because you said before, nurses weren't even included back when you were going through this. In this sit down, let's evaluate what's good for you. This is not good for me in our workflow. This is how we would bring this technology in. And I
Yeah.
think today we kind of advise against partners coming in and spinning up this back end of physicians and then forcing technology in and saying it's going to work for everybody. And you haven't sat down with the executives and the nurses to understand what the true pain points are of people in the organization.
Yeah.
And I do feel that some of the rapid pace of technology deployment has probably been a contributing factor to burnout. When you think about our bedside nurses, 12-hour shifts, right? Those aren't easy. They're working overtime. It's not only that we're throwing out technology changes at them, but policies and procedures are changing, right? Operating models are changing. I mean, I felt like every time we were deploying something technology related, the units were getting hit with 4 things from other departments. And so the rapid change as you're trying to do a really high stress, high paced job like bedside nursing, there's days when I'm, there's no way I could handle that, what some of the nurses are enduring right now. So it's just the amount we're throwing at people, I think.
Yeah. And oftentimes we forget that behind the technology is a human being.
Yeah.
And the person that's in the bed is a person and it's not a patient. Just to humanize our approach goes a long way. I do want to switch gears just a little bit because I'm a little intrigued when it comes to some of the rhetoric in the media. I think just about every day I turn on the television and I hear somebody say that they're upset with the US healthcare system and they're moving to Canada. And I think it's probably an empty threat because I haven't seen a mass exodus yet. But nonetheless, I think you are Canadian. So you've got this really unique experience where you have seen really both sides of the industry, from the Canadian healthcare market or the US healthcare market. And so just talk to me a little bit about, where do you see some of those differences? Because no system's perfect,
Right.
but we
Yeah.
definitely have some things we could learn from each other.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think the European countries have some we need to explore a little bit deeper. But no, the Canadian healthcare system is not perfect. And it's been a while since I've lived in Canada. So a lot of things have changed since I left. But I will say the biggest difference I always tell people is, in Canada, healthcare is truly a service industry. So no one goes into healthcare for the money in Canada. There's a time when physicians were leaving Canada at a rapid pace because they could make much more in the U.S. In the U.S., it's a business model, right? And so when
Yeah.
you look at the way we function in the U.S., it's just very much about it's about patient care, absolutely 100%. But you've got this whole business side of it as well. And so I think that complicates things significantly more. As someone who lives healthcare every day, I'm confused by our reimbursement models. So I don't know how the general public even can navigate it. I have to tell you a funny story. So I got hit with this. I don't know if you're aware, but if you do the Cologuard colorectal cancer screening test, the home
Mm.
test,
Uh-huh.
if that comes back positive, your colonoscopy that you have to have done because that was a positive test is
Mhm.
no longer considered preventative medicine. It's now diagnostic. And so
Mhm.
most insurance providers put it under that kind of that diagnostic category. It's not covered to the same level. And so you will start to get bills for your procedure without understanding why. Now, who would ever ask that before they agreed to have the procedure?
No one would think to ask that.
I did not ask, but kudos to my doctor, because I have a fear of a colonoscopy. I know I shouldn't, because it's just part of the experience of growing older, but I really am not excited about it. And so I said to her, "Can I just please do like that Cologuard screening?" And she said, "Well, you can," and then gave me the pros and cons associated with it. But had I not done that, Trish, I don't know. And here's the other thing. I was talking to another coworker, and again, I don't know why colonoscopies are such a subject we should bring up, but we did. And I told her that, and she, like you, had no idea that she could potentially end up with a huge bill because she went that route instead of doing the more invasive method. So
And
it's
Right.
something to think about.
to your point, Maureen, actually, I will tell you, my doctor warned me too, but I said, oh, what are the chances of that, right? Well, I won the
Yes.
lottery that day, but
Oh,
You hear it here, folks.
why should a doctor have to care about that when they're
Mhm.
right,
trying to provide healthcare to their patients?
Right.
right.
No, you probably shouldn't, even though it's good for you, right? So,
Yep.
buzzers, no, you heard it here first. Your colonoscopy is not preventative anymore. These ladies here just gave you the perfect example and questions to ask.
Well, it's preventative, but not when you do Cologuard
That's
first.
good.
That's
Not when you
the
do Cologuard first.
And Cologuard has a fairly high false positive rate, so take that into consideration when you make
There
your
we go.
decision.
The
yeah.
Buzz Podcast giving you knowledge all the way around, even from your colonoscopy.
You
Well,
can't put two nurses on a call, Mike, and not expect to have something that has to do with vomit or feces. That's usually
I
the way these things roll.
just saying. I'm just saying. This podcast is designed for you to learn, and we're learning from nurses today. Keep
Yes,
teaching
we are.
us. So, speaking of those reimbursement models, Trish, when patients need care right now, and nurses are seen as operational expenses for the institution or for the system, how do you feel about virtual nursing coming into play and its future, and potentially provide care without the operational overhead and scrutiny and resource drain that we're seeing today?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I will say there's a really good movement right now. It's a movement for nursing reimbursement, because the issue in the hospital is we're an operating cost, we're not any kind of revenue, and so there's a nice movement I'm following that's going on with that I think is interesting, because nursing used to be a reimbursable expense. But so virtual nursing, I think, is absolutely something we've got to be looking at closer. I'm actually doing a lot of work in that area right now, really looking at outcomes and things, which personally, we've got to do better at kind of getting data for our outcomes. But one of the things that we need to understand is that the nurses leaving the workforce right now are the ones with more than 10 years experience. And so it's not just that we're losing nurses, we're losing the nurses with the most experience. We're also losing new graduate nurses at a fairly rapid pace. And so that tells you we're not doing a good job of transitioning them to practice at a school. You know, as old as I am, I still remember my first nursing job and how hard that transition to practice was. So we're losing them on the front end and we're losing them on the back end. And so if virtual nursing can be a way to keep the experience in our industry longer, if it can be a way to help mentor or provide backup support for new graduates transitioning to practice, it's a win-win all around, right? And then you start to look at all the use cases of where you can actually deploy those virtual nurses. You know, I'm doing some work on hospital at home right now. Great use case there. I know a lot of people start with the admission and discharge type activities, but there's just an endless number of use cases for virtual nursing that will keep our nurses in the field longer, give them a career path, and quite frankly, it offsets a lot of the administrative burden for the bedside nurses too. So I'm a big fan of it. It's not new. You know, we had it for a while. It kind of lost steam. COVID helped bring it back. It's probably one of the silver linings of COVID. So we got to keep it going.
Yeah, let's exploit it. Because at the end of the day, no goals can be achieved unless nursing is supporting that. The strength of nursing is there. I want to touch on a little bit some of the things that you had brought up around nurses and their entry points or their exit points in and out of this profession. And really, let's talk about the nursing workforce shortage, because I think oftentimes people hear it as a nursing shortage, but it's not a nursing shortage. We don't have a nursing shortage. What we have are nurses leaving the bedside, as you said, and the new nurses coming in, that learning curve, that sense of disillusionment when they're entering the workforce, or the seasoned nurses that think, okay, gosh, this just doesn't make sense for my life any longer for a variety of different reasons. But in the end, what can we do to attract nurses into the profession? Because I think the passion is still there. We've got people lined up to be a part of the nursing programs. How do we keep that excitement going after they've entered the workforce? And how do we retain them, not just for the 2 years, but the 20 years?
You know, it's a great question. I certainly don't think I have all the answers by any means, but I think working environment is a lot of it, right? Because to your point, nurses aren't leaving nursing; they're leaving direct care providers, right? They don't want to be at the bedside because there's too much stress. They can't balance work and family life. We don't always allow flexible scheduling, right? 12-hour shifts don't work well for single moms. We've got to be flexible in scheduling solutions. I don't think money's the thing. I will say, we laugh because you know Maureen as well as I do. Whenever anything good happened, you gave the floor a pizza party. They don't want pizza parties. They want to be acknowledged for the profession they are. They want to be reimbursed for the profession they are, and they want working conditions that are sustainable. This was another thing that kind of came up in some of the differences between the U.S. health. It's not just healthcare, but the U.S. and Canada in general, is the amount of time off we give people. When you take a job out of school, right, 2 weeks vacation, 2 weeks doesn't go very far. And when you're being asked to kind of, be able to take time to yourself and come back to work re-energized and all that kind of stuff, 2 weeks isn't a lot of time when you're working 12-hour shifts like that. So I think there's just a lot of things around the work environment that we need to look at. I think virtual nursing can absolutely help with that, though. A lot of organizations are rotating people through virtual nurse. So if I could work 2 12-hour shifts and my last 12-hour shift was in virtual, that's different than being at the bedside for 3 days. And so I think that virtual nursing can really help balance some of that staffing too, so that people aren't getting quite as burnt out.
Yeah, great example.
Those are great examples, Trish. And again, this is you having retrospect on your career and how others should be learning how to keep nurses engaged and rewarding them for staying engaged over the course of a career. But those valuable insights are so important to those that are coming out. Before we start our wrap up here today, tell me, do you have any advice for those CNIOs or those nurses that are entering the field, those that have an aspiration? I want to be a nurse. My mom, my grandmother, they were a nurse, or my aunt was a nurse. I enjoyed watching them come home satisfied or not. And do you have any advice for those young men and women that are entering this profession today?
I will say I wouldn't change anything I did at all. I'm a nurse at heart. I will always be a nurse at heart. I think the biggest thing I could tell people in general is it's not personal, it's business, right? I'm the kind of person that takes things to heart a lot. And so I've often reflected back on that, in that you really have to, I don't want to say toughen the skin up, but you do have to, if you're a really empathetic person, which a lot of our nurses are really empathetic people, you have to toughen your skin a little bit on the front end, or it will get the best of you, which is probably what happened to me. But nursing's a great career. You can go from bedside, you can follow an administrative path, you can follow an education path. There's so many different paths you can take and still be involved in patient care. There's research, there's just endless things you can do. The informatics one has been great for me. If anyone's interested in CNIO, I would never deter anybody from doing that. It's a great career. And I would just say the best advice is just always be an advocate for what you believe in, for patient care and the clinical staff. That's one thing I've always tried to protect. Even when I reported up through IS, I was always trying to protect the clinical staff. It's a great career. You just got to really, I think, learn how to deal with stress and learn how to take care of yourself very early on in your career.
Those are really, really, really important words for everybody to hear, regardless of what profession you are in. At the end of the day, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, I tell Mike this all the time. I'm all for we all love to be busy. We love to do the things that we're passionate about, but sometimes passion can lead to exhaustion if you don't have the self-awareness to limit that. And just your story and your ability to share your story with everyone, like I said, it resonated very deeply with me. And I know it's going to resonate with our listeners, because these were important issues that were discussed. We talked about ourselves. We talked about nursing. We talked about the healthcare industry. And at the end of the day, we've got to have all of those pieces come together. So thank you again, Trish. It's been, like I said, a total pleasure. I was looking forward to it, and I'm so glad I got another chance to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me.
And thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. And to our Buzz listeners, our Buzz makers, thank you for joining us today. The Buzz Podcast is here to provide this insight like this with Trish and her journey and her story. And I want to thank Trish for being a nurse, and my nurse that's always on this journey with me in the podcast, Maureen. She keeps me straight, guys. So keep listening, hear more of our wonderful insights and our wonderful guests that join us for the show. But until next time, stay tuned, stay informed, and stay inspired, and keep buzzing. Thank you.